to attract those first people, this is what I recommend to all of our clients when they're just launching, is pick who your target market is. And then I want you to go meet 10 of those people and ask them to beta your podcast. Have them go listen to it and then say, what did you like? What did you hate?
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast on podcasting. It's your host, Adam A. Adams, and we are talking about growing your following, turning your following into a cult following, getting more listeners, downloads, subscribers, and we're doing it through this strange thing called podcast multipliers. Basically, in a nutshell, we're taking 50 pieces of content from just one episode, and who else would teach us how to do this except the person who runs the podcast multipliers? His name is Josh Tapp. He and his partner are running this team where they basically help you take one podcast episode and they'll extrapolate it into tons of different content. And they say that one of the big things that it does is grows your following. He also hosts the Lucky Titan podcast. So if you just want to jump in, look for the Lucky Titan. It's also in the show notes right now, so you can scroll down and click on the Lucky Titan and you'll be able to check it out. I was actually listening to a couple of episodes before this recording as well. You've had a couple of my friends on the podcast, which is kind of neat. The
awesome.
two that I listened to were a couple of friends that I've had for quite some time. But at any rate, Josh, thank you for jumping on the show with your podcast. If we can dive there first, the Lucky Titan. When did you start that show?
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's exciting to be here. So with the Lucky Titan podcast, it actually kind of came about because I was trying to network. And the interesting thing was I was in college when I started my first business, and we were a Facebook ads marketing company. And we kind of got to this point where I was just beating my head against the wall. I was so sick of doing it. We were making pretty good money, especially as college kids. But it was just one of those things where you just never really felt like you were doing what you really wanted to do, because I felt like I was only working with local businesses, but I wanted to be friends with people like Russell Brunson, Grant Cardone, these big name people. And in order to do that, I knew I had to start stepping out of my comfort zone. But I was a big podcast listener for years. So about 6 years ago, I actually started a podcast that I have removed from all platforms because it was so bad. And I just started interviewing entrepreneurs. And I kind of did it more as a networking tool. But what I found is that if I reached out to a billionaire, they would come on my show and I could get to know and to meet them. And doing that was honestly one of the biggest blessings for our business, because it allowed me to build a network of amazing people. So when we did actually launch the Lucky Titan and then what is now Podcast Multipliers, we had a huge group of people that we could dip into. And so that's kind of how the podcast came to be. And we really built it around saying, let's answer the questions that I genuinely have right now about growing a business. Because when I first started it was like, how do I pass six figures? We hit six figures, but how do I get past that point when I'm a horrible salesman, right? So I would talk to them about how they hit their lucky break and everything. But we're really on to, and this segment that we're on right now with the Lucky Titan is we're really talking about how do they build that cult following, bring out some of these amazing people who have millions of people following them and saying, what were the specific things you did to grow that following and to attract that following to where they were loyal followers and they stuck with you? So that's really kind of the essence of the Lucky Titan.
So to get back to the question then, you have had this podcast for how long, this podcast?
The Lucky Titan's been around for 3 years, I want to say, right around there now.
And then while you were sharing all the other things, you mentioned that you had another podcast that you've ripped out of everything. When was that started?
So that one was started 6 years ago, and it was just initially as a networking tool that we did eventually pull off entirely. It was actually tailored towards college students, which turns out have no money. And it's hard to sell products to them from my podcast when they have no money. So we ended up scrapping that entire thing. I think it was called the No Walls podcast, I think is what it was. But it doesn't even exist anymore.
No Walls. Well, based on like you starting a first podcast 6 years ago and then your other podcast like 3 years ago, besides just marketing to somebody with money, what changes did you make in that second podcast that's improved it?
Honestly, we ended up deciding if we're going to do this one and we want to actually build a podcast that has a real following of people, we have to treat it very differently. We have to start treating it like a show. And so for me, it kind of set me on this journey where I started looking at some of the big shows. One of my favorites is Jimmy Fallon. I love his show. It's hilarious. It has great content, and he's always, his following on that show is ridiculous. Like hundreds of millions of people see his show every single night. And this is a guy who really kind of came out of nowhere. So I like to look at shows like his and say, what were the difference makers that they had? And then looking at some of the top podcasters like John Lee Dumas or Tim Ferriss or Lewis Howes and saying, what was the differentiating factor? And what we found is there was a common denominator, and it was that they focused really heavily on their SEO. And I still to this day know very, very little about SEO other than you've got to use that in order to get more traffic to your site and to your podcast and everything as well. So we dove into how do we get SEO optimized show notes? How do we build a blog article for each episode that's going to attract more people each and every month? And so we started off there. We said, let's build a podcast, an SEO optimized article. And then we started focusing on the social media and pointing everything back to that article. And it was crazy to watch that the listenership would just keep growing. And not even just the listenership, but the amount of people who were visiting our site. If you're familiar with how many pages, I can't remember what they call it, but it's how many pages people visit when they come to your site. They'd come to see the article, but our average person would be viewing 3 to 4 pages. So they would go to that page, then they would immediately go check out, well, what is it these guys do? And so we ended up getting tons of clients just through having them go to our website and see what we had. That was the real differentiating factor.
So you mentioned that you have SEO rich blog posts. What's the difference between that and some other type of blog post? And what do you call the other blog post? Is it a traditional blog post? Is it a educational blog post? So basically just want to know what the difference is and how valuable are these blog posts that are SEO rich? Are we giving and taking there?
Right. Well, and that's a great question. And we've found a couple of things. These are just tips for anybody who's trying to do this in their own business. There's kind of 3 ways people do podcasts, what I would call blog posts per se. They'll use their host and they'll put in the description, and then maybe they'll get a transcription. That's about as far as they'll go. Some people will add in show notes that are kind of like, hey, here are the big takeaways from the episode, and they just hope that the SEO will happen. But the third way that we found is actually a combination of all of those. We have found that the transcript isn't actually the best way to get featured. Google will look at what you're doing and say, okay, how is this answering the question that somebody searched for? So for us, we have a podcast where we interview other entrepreneurs. So what we said is, why don't we just SEO optimize for their name? Because when you Google Adam Adams, if it's like, hey, here's Adam Adams' website, here's maybe his podcast, oh, and here's something he was featured on, you can almost always get featured in the top 4 by just putting their name in the keywords. So there's a hack for all of you. Go use it. The cool thing is that doing that, for most of the people you bring on your show, they get Googled hundreds, if not thousands of times a month. And you're going to get a heavy percentage of those people looking at your show. And it's just a fun way to kind of traffic hack there. But then the second thing is that within that article, you actually want to have timestamped show notes that talk about key takeaways and giving them places to go look within the episode. So Google is doing these amazing things, and I don't want to get super technical here, but Google has this amazing new feature they're working on really hard with voice recognition, so that when somebody searches for something on voice, you have to listen to the response. So what they're doing is they're actually going to be prioritizing audio content, because if I'm like, okay, hey Siri or whatever, I'm hoping my phone doesn't go off when I say that. If we say like, hey Siri, do this, or look up how to become a successful business owner, or look up Grant Cardone, it'll pull up, oh, hey, here was a recent article about Grant Cardone. It will pull it up and they can listen to the episode right there. It's going to be an amazing thing for those of you who are focusing heavily on that article.
So one of the things that you said was just to put their name in there, and in and of itself helps to be able to boost that up to maybe one of the top 4 when somebody's searching that person. Does that mean like the only people that you have on your show is somebody who's pretty famous? Because most of us don't get Googled all the time.
Right. And I wouldn't say that it has to be that way. That's just for those of you who are interviewing kind of the higher quality, I don't even say higher quality, but more known people. But that's just one of the many hacks, right? Because your title is absolutely everything. When people are Googling for anything, it's like how to, in your case, right? Like how to start a podcast. Right? That's going to be one of the keywords that for you, Adam, is a big one, right? Because you have a podcast about podcasting, right? So people are going to want to know, okay, how do I start a podcast? And if you provide the best answer to that question, you'll be listed. And the cool thing is that content is being produced by you and somebody else. There are people who do solo casts. We actually do solo cast episodes where I will share a marketing tactic or something that we've learned, a story of some sort. But there's actually a methodology for the headlines. I'm actually writing an article about it right now. I'll actually give it to you, Adam, to put in the show notes if you like. But it's basically, I think it's like 100 different templates for making headlines for podcasts that will stick, will be SEO optimized. And they're built to be SEO optimized, but they're also built to answer the question best for the person who's searching for it. So that's what's going to be attracting more people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then I didn't understand what the benefit of the timestamp was. Right. You mentioned that another thing that you do that's a big deal is within the podcast, you have timestamps of when things were discussed.
Right.
Is there some type of spider crawling in and listening to those timestamps to see if it answers a question, or like really what makes the benefit of having the timestamp?
Yeah. So what the timestamp is it's actually not an audio clip. What it will be is saying, if you want a great example of this, you go look at eofire.com from John Lee Dumas. If you look at his show notes, right, you could say, hey, at 2 minutes or from 2 minutes till 10 minutes, we talked about SEO optimizing blog articles, right? And then and here were some of the key takeaways within that point. And then from minutes 10 to 15, we talked about this. From 11 to 12, this was a story that my guest shared. Those sort of things are way more optimized because it creates examples, because Google is getting so sophisticated with their search that they're saying, does this actually answer the question that's being asked? Where before it was like, you kind of just had to get votes of confidence from people pointing back to your blog or what have you. Nowadays, Google's like, just give me the best response. Whoever has the best, most truthful response is the one who's going to get moved to the top.
Okay. Makes sense. I wondered what you meant in the pre-interview, as we were just discussing what we could talk today. You mentioned something called a cult following, and I suspect that not everybody knows what that is. What's your definition of a cult following before we try to figure out how to get one?
Yeah, no, I love that. Great. It's a great question because our entire brand is built around the Titans, right? And so everything kind of spins off of that. But you look at kind of the Elon Musks, the John Lee Dumases, I'm trying to think of more popular people, LeBron James or what have you, right? No matter what industry, there's people who have an audience of people who don't just occasionally dip in to see their content. These are the people who show up to everything. If you're an athlete, so like LeBron James, right? And you're a fan of him, whether you're a fan of him or not, you're going to every single game that he has. And anytime a new pair of shoes comes out with LeBron's name on it, you buy it. Anytime that LeBron posts on Instagram, you like it, share it, comment on it, and try to get your friends to do so, right? That's the cult-like following. We hear it like, it's the raving fans or what have you, but people with podcasting are so focused on getting these numbers of millions and millions of people, but you really only need 10, 20, 100 people who are that cult-like following who will follow everything you do because they will advocate so heavily for what you do. The rest of the numbers will come. And really, when it comes down to it with podcasting, the era of needing millions of views is over. You really don't need that. In order to get featured and be kind of one of the top people and then one of the top dogs in podcasting, all you really have to do is focus on how do I really help this core people? And the way that we recommend doing that is just being involved in their lives. That's what people care about.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about is with this cult following, like there's this mountain bike brand that was founded the year that I was born. They're Rocky Mountain, and I'm sure you go to the Rocky Mountains all the time. They're founded in British Columbia, Canada. You're in Idaho. I'm in Colorado. We all got the Rocky Mountains. But anyway,
we're living on the Rocky Mountains, man.
So these guys, like one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it is they were founded the same year I was born. I think that's pretty cool.
Right.
But I literally would never buy a bike that was any other brand. And I don't really truthfully know why, because like just the fact that it's founded my birth year doesn't seem to be a big enough deal. And there's a lot of great bike brands, but is that kind of what you mean by cult following? Like they just 100%. Will follow you to the ends of the earth regardless of?
Well, and you want people like that, right? If somebody asks them why they love LeBron James, they're going to be like, well, they might spit off some stats or something. In your case, it's like you made an emotional connection because, well, it was made the year I was born. How cool is that? I'm one of those people, I have this weird connection to things like that. The number 7, That was my number in all the sports I played. Everything I do, if you're a gamer, my gamer tag has a 07 at the end of it. I've always got a 7 in there because I think it's a lucky number, right? I do love it, and it's gimmicky. But if people ask me, like, legitimately, why do you do that? They'd be like, it's something I do, right? It has nothing to do with. But what happens is there is something directly tied to that, an emotional moment for you that was tied to that was caused by the brand or by the athlete or what have you.
Yeah.
And our job as entrepreneurs is to create that emotional connection for them. Especially if you're an entrepreneurial podcaster, if you want to make that connection for them, is you want to find people at the lowest moment of their lives in their business and provide them the path out of it with your free podcast content. If you do that, even if you put out crap content, they're going to keep listening to you because they're like, you know what? Adam changed my life. He helped me understand that I needed to have a cult-like following, right? I don't know, have like an amazing following of people, right? Those are the people that we're really looking for. And that's how you get yourself into their world.
Awesome. So based on like growing this following and making it so that they're your true fans, I definitely have a few questions. And one of the first ones might surprise you. I'm just thinking to myself, like your podcast, The Lucky Titan, it's a top 50 entrepreneur podcast, right?
Right.
And at the same time as that's part of your bio. That's part of like one of the cool things that you'll share with people is, look, our podcast is really doing well.
Right.
You also mentioned that you might not need a whole bunch of cult followings. You might only need 10 or 20 or 100 true like advocates for you and your brand in order to take off. Now, are these things like kind of separate or are they the same? Is it like, okay, I need to get those 10 people first and eventually I have a top 50 podcast? Or is it like, let's strive for top 50 podcast and maybe we'll have those 20 advocates somewhere in between?
Right. I think it's almost a chicken and the egg experience because you have to test. You have to figure out what do people actually want? Who are the people you want to be your raving fans, right? That's what people really care about. Your image is important in that sense. But when it comes down to it and attracting that following, your main priority needs to be, how do I provide content for those specific people? I mean, that's everything. And does that answer your question, or do you want to reiterate the question for me?
So to ask it another way, are we looking for becoming a top 50 podcast first and foremost? Or are we looking for getting like 10 raving fans first and foremost?
Right. And I love that you bring that concept up. And I'm going to answer this in the way that nobody likes to hear, which is it depends. But the reason it depends is you need to know the goal of your podcast. For me, mine was I wanted to meet very successful people, but obviously I was going to sell to them if I had a chance to meet them and work with them. So I had a service that I knew I could provide for them. For us, it's been podcast production, branding, content, that kind of stuff has been our world for the past 6 years. And I knew, okay, if I can just get in the door with these high ticket people, I'll be able to close high ticket sales. So I wasn't concerned about being a top 50 podcaster, right? My goal wasn't to grow that following. So I said, how do I get a following of people who are very wealthy? And I only need 10 to 100 of those people who just love me, love what I do. What are they actually looking for in content? So the content that people I'd bring in would be answering the questions that those specific people would have. And answering those questions was allowing the guests and I would create a lot of opportunities for partnership, but the audience was very interested in what I was doing. So they would start researching me and then reach out to me and end up buying from us in the long run. And I can tell you this much, when it's one of your raving fans and they reach out to you for a sales call, it's not a sales call. It's a collecting cash call because they're ready. They're ready to buy. They know you, they know your platform and everything about you. They're ready to buy. So that probably answers your question a little bit better, but I would tell you that for a lot of people who enter this world, they're like, okay, I need 10,000 downloads per episode so I can start to at least make a little bit of money. I 100% don't believe in that. I mean, we closed our first 6-figure retainer when I had probably 34 downloads on my podcast per episode, 34, 35 downloads. And it was because I had some amazing guests on my show. And what I would do is just network with them and say, how do we partner? How do we get this to work? And interestingly enough, one of my listeners was friends with one of my guests. They both reached out to me together, hired me for a company they owned together. That was one of the kind of key moments in my brain, kind of those pivotal epiphany moments where you're like, oh, why would I need to spend all this time to make $100 a month as getting a sponsor for my show, where I could literally just close a deal on my own stuff and make six figures. So it's a big deal.
That's like a mic drop right there.
Right.
Like I need the listener to let that resonate and ring in their ears. Why would I worry about $100 of revenue coming into the podcast every month if I could close on six-figure deals with one or two listeners? Like, it's not difficult to make 200 grand if you can just close 2 six-figure clients through your podcast. Wonderful. And I had a podcast episode. It's not in front of me right now, but on this podcast, there's been a couple of other times that I'll, like you said, having a solo episode. And the main thing that I focused on was just monetizing. And I beat that to a dead horse. I was like, dude, why are you so worried about this stuff? So I love that you said that, Josh. We can likely make so much more money by not tripping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Right.
So, at any rate, awesome
tripping
stuff.
Over bags of cash for pennies.
Bags of cash.
That's really what it comes to.
Love it. I really want to talk about these 50 pieces of content with the podcast multipliers. And I know we're going to get there. There was a couple of points that you had made before you asked me that question. And one of them was, you've got to truly understand who are the people that you want to be your raving fans. And you did that with your second podcast. With your first podcast, you didn't.
Right.
You like just created a podcast. You helped a lot of college age students, but it wasn't who you probably would have if you took an extra 30 minutes to sit down and really try to figure this out. You probably wouldn't have started that other podcast. And I know that there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast or are listening who may have already made that mistake.
Right.
They might have actually been the person who doesn't understand who they want to have their raving fans. And I think that's a huge, huge, huge point because if you're trying to talk to everybody, you're really talking to nobody. They don't know who they're talking about. They don't know if they should be listening to the podcast at all. And B, you have no way of providing the best content for the right person unless you know the right person. Out of like this little topic of who are the people that you want to be your raving fans and how do I provide content to them, what would you say the biggest pieces that you really want to pour into a new podcaster with that in mind?
Yeah, the first thing I would tell people is to find that person requires groundwork. And I tell people this all the time. If you're expecting to get into podcasting, expecting to make millions of dollars, this is not a get rich quick thing. Podcasting is probably one of the slowest ways to generate money, quote unquote, if you go the traditional route. It can be the fastest way, but the traditional route of get a bunch of followers, have them listen to all your shows, get a couple ads in there. It's in my opinion, it's just asinine to go that direction. To attract those first people, this is what I recommend to all of our clients when they're just launching, is pick who your target market is. And then I want you to go meet 10 of those people and ask them to beta your podcast. Have them go listen to it and then say, what did you like? What did you hate? But the thing you really want to know is what questions would you have asked? Ask them that question. What question would you have asked? So I'm sitting here with Grant Cardone and I'm trying to ask questions on your behalf. What questions would you have asked? Then go back and re-invite that guest back on, ask them those questions, and then send that episode directly to that person and watch what happens. It's absolutely insane because what they'll do is say, wow, Adam just asked Grant Cardone this question that I wanted to know and even mentioned me in the episode. And then he sent it to me. I mean, he's going to go share that with all of his friends, right? They're going to post it all over social media and be like, guess what? Grant Cardone talked about me, blah, 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 right? It becomes a status point for them. But what's crazy if you watch what happens when you do that is after 10 or 15 people have done that, you're going to have 150 downloads per episode and it'll just start coming. You'll get subscribers. That's really the fastest way to grow because you remain in the trenches with people. And I know even for us, so I was talking to John Lee Dumas from EO Fire and he's one of the top podcasters out there. But this guy still does that. He's getting, I think, 2 or 3 million downloads per episode right now. But he still goes to his audience. Every single time has an ad of like, hey, if you ever need to reach us, just email me. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And he goes and asks them, what questions would you like me to ask somebody who's in the lead generation space? And he goes and asks that question, sends them the episode. And if you watch, what happens is every time you do that, you're going to get 2 or 3 new subscribers, or 10 or 50 or 100 new subscribers listening to your episodes. It's really a cool process, and it does take groundwork, but it's going to be the best customer research you ever do. And at the end of it all, it also creates sales opportunities 90% of the time. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Good stuff. Love it. Okay. With one of the things that your company does with what you serve other people in is helping them to take piece of content that they've already created, like a podcast episode,
right,
and really trying to find a way to pull that out into like 50 different pieces of content. And if we wanted to do that ourselves, if like the listener is thinking, man, I don't know how much it costs to hire Josh, but I only got 2 nickels, so
right. How do I
maybe I need to try to do this on my own. What do we need to be focused on? And some of the questions that I have in my mind is, are these micro content? Are these just posts? Are these audiograms, videograms? Are they 1-minute clips, 2-minute clips, 17-second clips? Are they on YouTube? Are they on social media? Which social media? How many different social medias? Do we need to follow up with people after we post these things and like follow up in the comments and go into the DMs with everybody? Like, is this going to be a shit ton of work, or can we all do this?
So the one thing I always tell people is, if you're just starting, so let's just say you're coming at this, you're still working a job and you're trying to start a podcast. The answer with this is start on one platform. Don't try to do everything at once, because it will overwhelm the living daylights out of you. I tried to do it myself. It'll kill you, especially if you're doing more than 1 episode a week. At the time, I was doing a daily podcast when I first started this one, and I was doing everything myself. I was probably putting in 6 hours a day just doing this. And then the other 2 hours were basically recording the episode. So I had no time for anything else in my company. So that's the answer for somebody who's starting. I would say if you're an entrepreneur, you would want to really heavily focus on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is absolutely the best place if you're an entrepreneur. If you're focused on, so let's say you're like in the true crime space, or maybe you're a sportscaster, figure out where those people are hanging out. So the second thing I will say is that the content doesn't hugely matter. It's only about 30% of the equation. The other 70% of the equation is, where are you posting it? It blows my mind. I have people all the time. They'll come to me and they'll be like, Josh, I'm on like 20 different platforms and I can't get past 50 downloads per episode. And I just laugh at it, because it's like, well, where are you posting it? How many eyeballs are you getting on this content? How are you tracking this? And what happens is, most of us will say, well, it's on 20 platforms because it's on iTunes and Google and Spotify. Guys, that's not a cool thing anymore. That was cool 20 years ago when podcasts first came out, right? It was cool because, Apple's going to promote my podcast. That's just the necessary evil. It's like having a website in a business. Even though sometimes it's not even worth it, you just kind of have to have it. It's just one of those things, because you have to be listed in those places. But iTunes and Google and Spotify, they're not going to prioritize your content because you don't have a name like Grant Cardone, right? Or Tony Robbins or somebody. They're going to prioritize those guys because their content is seen by more people. So what you need to focus on is, how do I get external eyeballs outside of those platforms, outside of iTunes, Spotify, and Google? How do I get other people's eyeballs, in this case, ears, on my content? How do I get them hearing my content? So we believe in content repurposing, and it's about getting 10,000 to 50,000 cold eyeballs or ears on each of our episodes. So when I started doing this for myself, this is what we did. When I had a team. So if you're listening to this and you do have some money, you have a team or what have you, this is the step you want to take. Is you, bare minimum, you need to be creating an SEO optimized article for each of your episodes. And that is the hub for where everything goes. Okay. All of your social media, all of your YouTube channels, all of your podcasts are pointing back to that article. The reason why is because the article allows you to control the traffic once you get it, right? Your job then is to collect emails and do whatever, right? I'm not the funnel guy. I'm not the sales guy. If you want to learn more about how to do that, just go follow somebody like Russell Brunson, right? Go listen to his stuff on that. But to get the eyeballs on your content, you want to go out and you want to say, okay, where are people hanging out who are these ideal customers? And if you have those 10 people, don't even ask them. Go look at what groups they're in. Don't say, hey, what are your favorite groups? Because they'll be like, oh yeah, this, that, and the other. Go onto their Facebook profile, see which groups they're in, join those groups. And then you should be posting consistently in there. You don't put links or anything. You're just posting your content. And there's like, hey, here's some great value for you in this group. and then make content specific to that group. Everybody tries to make all of these different pieces of content, post them just on their pages, and it doesn't yield much. I have, I think, 14,000 or 15,000 followers on my LinkedIn profile, but I get more traction on a post if I post it in a group with 1,000 members than I do putting it on my own page. Because what happens is people are going to start paying attention to your content where they want to consume it. If they're just scrolling through their main feed, it's pretty hard to catch their eyeballs, especially with podcasts, because we're kind of a more boring type of content. We're made to be consumed on the move. So they want to be able to listen to us while they're working out or driving or what have you. But our entire focus when we put out these 50 pieces of content is they need to go onto all these other different platforms. So let me give you the types of content that we produce, just so that to give you an idea. So we do one SEO article. We take the audio, and that obviously gets distributed to the top 20 podcast platforms. Again, necessary evil, right? So you're looking at 21 different separate pieces of content right there. Then you want to make 5 different pieces of content that will be shared on social. Now, these pieces of content, what we do is we'll do a captioned social media video. So this is a 1 minute, or it's like a 30-second to a 90-second clip that will have, if you're interviewing somebody, it's just the face of the person. It has links and everything on it, right? You can go check, if you look at my Instagram, at the Lucky Titan, you can see examples of all this content. But the most important part is A, it's video. B, it's got the progress bar on the bottom so people know it's not a long piece of content. And C is they can read it. They don't have to turn the audio on. I think it's 85% of content on social media is consumed without the audio on. So make sure that your videos have those captions on there. We actually do 2 of those per every video. So we cut out per every episode. So we'll take those and we'll say, okay, what are 2 of the most noteworthy sections, right? And then we'll also do an audiogram, which if you're using a host like Buzzsprout, and I know I'm spitting a bunch of tactics at you here, but I want you all to be thinking about this. You want an audiogram, which if you have Buzzsprout, you can build one in like 10 seconds. If you have any of these other hosts, most of them have a SoundBYTE or Audiogram built into it. Then you want to have 3 different quote cards. Those are your pieces of content. The quote cards are just little pieces of quotes. It's a picture of the guest or of yourself if you're the one doing it, and a specific quote. And your goal is to put this onto all the different social media platforms. So that gives you 6 different pieces of content that you can post to the big 4 platforms. So Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. If you post to each of those platforms, even just to your profiles, you'll see a huge boost in the amount of people listening to your show. But again, this is the advanced tactic for those of you listening to this, is you take that content, instead of just posting it to your page, post it in groups. You have to remove the links. It's like, hey, don't go listen to my episode. It's like, hey, I just interviewed this guy. Super awesome piece of content for marketers. That would be totally worth your time. And a lot of people listen to that. They'll go look at your page, and then from your page, they'll find your stuff. Again, that was super fast and a buttload of information, but I hope that helped.
Yeah, I might have a few questions on that. Posting in the groups, not your page. Would you post this through your personal account? You would be logged into your personal account, then you would go into the group, and then you would post your own stuff. Is that right?
Yes.
Can I challenge that a little?
Yeah.
And just ask you, it feels like that would be more spammy. Like people would be like, oh, self-promo, kick him out or kick her out of the group.
Right.
All they're trying to do is just promote their own like podcast in our group. We've got this big following and they're kind of coming. So I'm curious if that's the way, the only way, if there's another way. Like I'm trying to decide in my head, like, do I have a couple of people that work with me in my team and maybe have them post it so it doesn't seem like it's self-promotion? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Josh?
So, and that's a good question, because yes, it can be extremely spammy. I don't recommend posting every single episode into a group. What you do is you look for questions that are being answered and you respond with the video. Or are you in the ClickFunnels group, Adam?
Yeah.
So if you're not a part of the ClickFunnels group, just go join it. It's like one of the best Facebook groups you'll ever be in. There's a girl in there. Her name's Bailey Richards. She did the summit for Russell Brunson. Go look at her content. She does, it's not spammy, it's not self-promotion, it's real meaty, valuable content. So for me, right, the Lucky Titan, my ideal client is actually a marketing agency. believe it or not, you'd think they'd be able to do their own stuff, but most of them hire us to do their own marketing for them. So marketing agencies are who we're looking for. So if I join a Facebook group specifically for marketing agencies and I go and post in there and I'm like, oh, I just interviewed, this is what Grant Cardone said about being a marketing agency or making $1 million as a marketing agency, boom. They're not going to spam that because you don't have links on it. You don't have any self-promotion on there. It's like, this is what Grant Cardone said. That's the value because you're providing true valuable content. The goal with social media is to get them to look for you.
Okay.
Right? We want to get them to search for you.
Okay, that answers a couple of the other questions. So one of the things that you mentioned is you're not posting links. And that's a huge thing that like could have sounded like it got glossed over and the listener is probably like, oh, well, how else are they going to get to my podcast if I don't put the link, right? And so pretty much what I'm hearing you say is the link, it's obvious spam automatically and just
you'll be kicked out.
You're just coming with the value from the people that you know they're already asking the questions, you're answering the questions. Then in a way, it's kind of like a slow play or a girl playing hard to get.
Right.
You're not like jumping in there and being like, I have the best podcast in the world. It's just simply, hey, here's a cool thing that might help you. And you're really hoping that they say, ooh, what does he do? What's his name? Like, how does he know this stuff? Does he know Grant? And they might just search for you. And that you're starting to build those connections in like a slow play. Like if I was playing poker, I didn't just bet my whole hand on the flop or whatever, you know what I mean? That everyone's going to fold. You're not trying to get people to fold. You're trying to get them to follow you, to stay with you. And the only way to do that is to maybe knock on the table a couple of times in poker or whatever it is. Let somebody else raise and you just call. This is the slow play or the girl playing hard to get way that I think that you're improving how many people really truly follow you.
Right. And I would challenge that a little bit just to say that it can be a fast play. So for example, if you're going to do this to all of the 4 major platforms, the cool thing about social media is it will show it to at least 250 people. That's just what happens. So on our captioned social media videos alone, without comments or anything, they're going to get 250 views on them. If you think about that, how much work would that have taken you to get 250 downloads on your podcast? But you could just have 250 people seeing your brand, seeing what you do by just posting it on social media. And then again, if it's all kind of pointed back to the blog article, the more people you can get to your site, the more people will subscribe and stick on your podcast. That's what you really want to look for, is saying, if you want them to stick, get them to your site, right? It's not about selling them anything. It's about getting them to stick on the podcast. So yeah, does that make sense? Can I answer the question well?
Yeah, great. So you said Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook are the 4 main ones.
The big ones.
Is there a reason why there's so many? Why is Clubhouse not part of that? Or why is TikTok not part of your top 4? Or why is, what's that last one that I can't remember, but let's just say TikTok and Clubhouse. Why are those not part of your top 4?
So my reasoning behind that, first off, Clubhouse, especially if you're a part of Clubhouse, you'd have to be doing everything live. So that makes it a little more difficult. I have a personal belief in sticking with the oldie but goldie platforms. The ones that have survived 5 years have proven themselves. I've actually never once logged into TikTok, but from my impression of it is literally just a remake of Vine, which was a cool thing, 10 years ago now, right? And not to say that they're not valuable platforms, that they might not stick around. So I'm not saying you can't do those, but you're going to have much more guaranteed success staying on these main core platforms before you start betting your chips in these other places. But you can't, obviously, so here's the cool thing, right? If you're doing a captioned social media video, that'd be pretty easy to translate over to Pinterest and TikTok and what's that place called? Reddit, all these other different platforms. You could do that and you could multiply the content. We personally have never needed to go past those core 4. And to be completely honest with you, it's either Instagram or LinkedIn are kind of the 2 biggies that get a lot of results. Yeah.
So many questions here. One of the things that I thought I heard you say is the first thing was an SEO rich article. And the second one was audio, obviously, and it was, you said that's 21 right there. What did you mean by that? If I could
There are
take you back.
20 different platforms that you can post your podcast to, right? So a piece of content is a place where it can be seen. Okay, people try to think of content as, oh, you have to have 50 different looking pieces of content. That's just not true. You need 50 different places or times that you can be seen, heard, et cetera, right? So that would be, the 20 platforms would be iHeartRadio,
Stitcher.
Podcasts,
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So you can get
all right. So that's 20 of them is all of these different platforms like Alexa, Apple Podcast, and some of these other platforms that people are listening to shows.
Right.
And then another one was the article. So you're also talking about social media, and you said there's like 4 different social medias that you need to be on. It's Twitter, IG, LI, and FB. And you mentioned a few things like 30 to 90 second of the interview needs to be like extracted and turned into like audiogram, I believe you were saying, right?
Those will just be captioned social media videos, which you can make on, I think it's a free app called Kapwing, Kapwing. You can do that there.
All right. So it's a video, and some of the things that are important on it, audiograms, I guess, for the most part, these are much shorter, right?
Correct.
That we're talking about now are 30 to 90 seconds.
Right.
And it's a video, and the takeaways that I got from you is you need a progress bar at the bottom, generally at the bottom, and it shows you how far into it you are. And one of the reasons you said you want to have a progress bar is because if they don't know how long the video is, they might check out. But if they see that they're almost done with the video, they'll be like, oh yeah, let me stay to the end. It's only 60 more seconds. And then you said that they need to be able to read it. So I think that we need to put on some, like the transcript almost on the
captions
actual
on the
video,
bottom.
the captions. All right. So how do we get those captions on there, Josh?
So there are Kapwing, like I just mentioned, you can make these there. And I think it's called Clipscribe is another one. Another great platform. These are all like $15 a month or cheaper platforms, right? But those you can bust out that content pretty quickly, especially once you make a template and you just copy the template, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, our team, they build ours, a lot of them in those platforms, but they also edit them differently. But anyways, that content can be made that way. But then you also have the quote cards, right? So we try to do 6 pieces of content that are then distributed to the 4 platforms, which makes 24 more pieces of content.
I see.
That makes sense.
I see. Okay. So 6 pieces of content that go on those 4 different platforms that we discussed.
Right.
And one of those pieces of content is a number of these 30 to 90 second videos.
Correct.
Another one is an audiogram. Another one is 3 different quote cards.
Right.
And so I'm missing 1, right?
Audiogram, we do 2 of the caption social media videos.
2 of the caption. Cool.
Yeah.
And in your experience, like, does it get lower amount of results when you're putting like on all of your different socials? Because somebody, and I've done this personally, and this is the reason why I'm bringing it up. I might see somebody post something on Insta, and then I'll see it on Facebook. And by the time that I see the same thing on LinkedIn, I make absolutely no effort to like or comment anymore. I might have on the first one, and I really like the person, so I might on the second one, but I'm like over it by the third time that I see the same piece of content. And so what I'm curious about is if there's some type of algorithm within like some of these socials that they're really looking for engagement. That's the name of the game, is keeping people on their platform. But you've put the same thing in 4 different places. And so like they're not going to engage on 2 of the platforms, for example. Have you seen that go against anybody by doing these 6 pieces of content in the 4 different places?
So yes, if you post them all at the same time. So what we recommend is, just so people have an understanding of this, if you have over 1,000 friends, connections, or whatever anywhere, your post will only be seen on their feeds for about 2 hours. So what we do is we actually stagger it. So we'll post on LinkedIn at 8 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock we post on Facebook, and then at noon we post, you see what I'm saying? And you only do that for 1 piece of content. But what we do, and this is a high level tip for everybody, is those 6 pieces of content should be dripped to bring people back to that episode over the next year. So what we do is anytime we record an episode, let's just say the day of the launch, we're launching the caption social media video, which directs them back to our show, right? Then the day after that, we'll launch the audiogram. And then a month later, we'll post a quote card. And then 3 months later, we'll post another quote card. 6 months later, 8 months, whatever, right? And as you do that, it resurfaces the content. It's really cool to watch because it gets seen on all these other platforms, but it gives people a chance to see it everywhere. And most of the people that are following you, because you would be concerned about that, right? As if this one person is following me everywhere, is it going to bug them? But you'd be surprised how many different people are seeing it, right? Because if you only have 50 followers and there's the same 50 people on all of your platforms, you might want to invest a little bit in growing one of those platforms, right? That's why I recommend for most people is you don't use this multi-purpose strategy until you've got one solid platform that's working well. And for most people, I would say you need to be past 500,000 in revenue before you even try to do this, because it takes a lot of team. It takes a lot of time to be able to do all this. And please do not, I'm going to just put this ad in there for everybody. Do not try to do this by yourself. This is not a one-man, one-woman strategy, period. It's one that requires a team to do it.
Out of curiosity, you mentioned if you have 1,000 followers on one of these platforms, then you're probably only going to be showing for about 2 hours.
Right.
What if I have 300? What if I'm the person who has 300 friends? Then am I showed longer or am I showed shorter?
You what typically if I have 5, are showed 000? Longer. You are typically showed longer. So when we got to 14,000, it was one of those moments where it was like, it almost doesn't matter how many more followers we get, because we've kind of maxed out their algorithm, right? Where they're like, we're still only going to show you for 2 hours. So the way you resurface the content is getting people to comment, right? So with us, we're actually targeting 5 comments. So our team actually goes in for each of the platforms. We'll get 5 people to comment on it because it'll resurface it. And then we respond to those comments, it resurfaces it. Every time you resurface it, you can bet on anywhere from 50 to 100 new comments, or views on your content.
Do you do this for your clients? Like, let's just say I hire you,
right?
And your goal is to get 5 comments. Are you managing all of that, or are you doing the first part and then telling me, hey, Adam, you've got to go and reply to people?
So, and that's really just honestly a question about how we work at our company. Our entire vision with this company, and when I first built it, I'm like, I want to build this for somebody like me, who I am very lazy. I have 1 hour a week that I want to put into content. And I don't want to have to be commenting or being on, I hate social media. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't really use it. Don't really love it. It's one of those things that I know there's value in it, but I'm not a consumer. I'm a producer. And what we've been finding is that for our clients, the only thing they care about is that we take over all of it, right? I want you to literally be able to record an episode in 10, 15 minutes, and you don't even have to send it to me. We will literally go and pull it from your computer for you, pull it from your Zoom or wherever, pull it for you. And then we do everything moving forward. That's why we usually get most of our clients is they're like, I just don't have time. Those are the people that end up working with us.
Cool. What questions have I not asked you, Josh, that I should have in order to really hit on the points that will help the listener be better at podcasting?
I think the why you would want to do this. I would say most of the people that work with us, right? We have 22,000 podcasters that follow us. And of those podcasters, there's 2 questions I get asked every single time somebody comes into our world is, when do I get sponsors? And how do I grow my audience, right? That they ask me that over and over and over and over again. And those are the 2 most wrong questions in the industry. It's what value am I going to provide? And how am I going to monetize that value? Not, I'm going to just follow the bandwagon and get sponsors, right? For some people, sponsorship is the right way to go. But I would say for 99% of people, it shouldn't even be on your scope until you're at tens of thousands of downloads. You should be focusing on how can I make money in other ways. But the why behind the content is hugely important. What I believe in is that, and actually I'm going to preface this with a story. So my wife is pregnant with our first child. And thank you. Yes, we're very excited about that. When she was about 6 or 7 weeks in, started getting a pain in her stomach. And both of us were like, oh shoot, what is this pain? So she Googles it. And I can tell you the answers on Google were anything from you've worked out too hard and you have a stitch in your side to the baby just died. And my wife is a mild hypochondriac, so she's like panicking. we did call the doctor in to figure it out, right? But figured it out, it was nothing, right? It was just like a growing pain, basically. But that is the value and the importance of having rock solid, the best answer to content out there. And too many of us, especially in the podcasting space, are just regurgitating what other people are saying. But the problem when we do that is it's like playing a game of telephone. If Tony Robbins has done the research on neurolinguistic programming and he helps people to prevent suicides, and then you go and you try to dilute that information to make it more consumable, quote unquote, you could be hurting people by not providing them with the best information possible. And I don't think people take that to heart enough, where they say, how is my business action, how is my content actually impacting the lives of the people that I'm producing for? And for us, we're not in the health space, so it doesn't seem as dire. But if somebody's sitting there in their business, they're ready to pull their hair out. And for example, you're listening to Adam's podcast and you're like, oh, I've been trying to start my own podcast and get things going. And then you listen to my podcast or our episode we just did here, and you try to post on a bunch of different platforms. I've done you a disservice. That's not what I would want any of you to do. I would say focus on one platform, get really good at one platform, build an audience of 5,000, 10,000 people, and then start thinking about how do I expand it out. It's all about the why, and it's providing that really true valuable content, because those who do win. And people will say, well, it's all about quantity of content. I am a big believer in quantity of content, but if you're answering the question with a diluted or a half-baked answer, you're really doing a disservice to your audience.
Fun stuff. Josh Tapp, thank you for jumping on. Again, his podcast is The Lucky Titan, so you find that easily by scrolling down. His website's also in the show notes, so just scroll down. You can click on the website. Josh, you mentioned something like you were creating a piece of content. I'm having a hard time remembering what it was, but you mentioned that once it was ready, you'd be able to give it to us so we can put it in the show notes. So that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Josh, I'm going to hold you to it. Make sure that you get this to us. And
it'll be done tomorrow, my friend.
It'll be done tomorrow. Perfect. All right. And so basically just a few things that I learned and that are takeaways from this episode. And one of them was that it's not quite as difficult as some of us thought it was to put out 50 pieces of content. The second one was how to do that, and not to spam people, and not to use the links, and not to put it all of the same groups all at the same time at the same day. And knowing that some of these pieces of content, once we put them out, they'll last for about a couple of hours. And so the best way to do it is to hold off and put it in another place at another time, so that you're always staying in front of people. Those things they really impacted me personally. It's some stuff that I haven't done that way, and I really, really appreciate it. So another one is you talked about, and I loved the way that you said this, when you're trying to figure out your raving fan and what content that you should be giving to them, you need to go and pick that target market, number one. Number two, get 10 of those people to be beta. And number three, asking them to listen to some of the episodes. And number three, saying, what questions would you have wanted me to ask, or would you have asked if you were part of this interview? I think that that's a piece of market research that most of us are neglecting, and that'll help anyone who's listening regardless. So another one, to focus on one platform in the beginning. You don't want to overwhelm yourself by trying to be the best at growing your Twitter and Insta and LinkedIn and Facebook all at the same time. It's like you're rowing in multiple different directions, and you're never going to get anywhere. You put it all on one until it's on autopilot, and then you can start moving into that next one. Talking a little bit about SEO article, the 20 different audio places that you can put audio, the 2 different pieces of 30 to 60 second interviews that you're putting on like different social media, with video, with progress bar, with, I don't remember what it's called.
Captions.
Captions. With captions. And then also doing the audiogram, and then the 3 different quote cards. A quote card meaning like that you take a branded square image in general, and it makes your guest sound really smart. It makes the guest really, like, you really highlight the things that they said. So you create like 3 of those, put those all over. Another one that is a big takeaway is we're posting in groups. not our personal Facebook, we're going to get a lot more traction. More eyeballs are going to see it. And they're going to be coming for the right reasons. Like if we put it on our personal, maybe it looks like spam. But if we put it in this group where people have been looking for that, it's more likely to get a little bit of traction. Tons of valuable content. So I really, really appreciate it. I'll be able to make 100 pieces of micro content out of this one. Thank you, Josh.
Do it.
I'm going to let you go. You have a good one.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. Bye for now. 2 quick things before you go. Number one, if you are looking to upgrade like your podcast equipment or just get your very first affordable microphone, then go to growyourshow.com/PDF. That link's in the show notes. Go ahead and scroll down. On that PDF is 100% equipment for your podcasting studio that I've personally vetted. My team has vetted this. We know that it works. We know that it's affordable, and we don't want you paying more for your podcasting equipment. So again, if you're looking to upgrade your equipment or get your very first inexpensive microphone that works great, that's where you go. And then number 2 is got a free course, A to Z, on everything you need to know about podcasting. And you don't have to go anywhere but the podcast in order to access it. You don't have to even give me an email address to access it. It is just the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So what you'll do is you'll scroll down a bit. You'll click on all episodes and scroll down because we're hundreds of episodes in. And you'll see that episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is a free course from A to Z on launching a top podcast. Take advantage of those 2 things. I'll see you on the next episode.